All right, good morning, everybody. So this morning, what we're going to be talking about is what is normal teenage behavior and what is something that's a little bit more worrisome. This is a topic that I feel pretty strongly about and wanted to share with you just because of my own experience as a parent, that I made the mistake of dismissing what I thought was normal teenage behavior and like kind of missing the signs about what would have been more worrisome, and things that, luckily I didn't like wait too long and picked up on some stuff. But this is, I think, something that, is something that all parents of teenagers struggle with, because you like hear about teenagers and the way they are, and you can like write stuff off, or you can like be like overly concerned about something that is more typical and not something that you really need to worry about. Like in Yvonne and I's role, we see both. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. And hopefully you will find this really informative and helpful. I am going to turn it over to Ms. Gunter.
Thank you. Okay. So, I was like going over this last night and I'm like, wow, I feel like I'm 2 for 3 right now as far as like getting it right with my parenting. So always remember that Miss Davis and I are not experts in that we have it all figured out. I would call us experts in that we're trying lots of things and we're sharing what we learn. So just keep that in mind. So what is normal? The question that you posted, like, is there anything that your kiddo's done that you feel, may or may not be normal? And I always get a little bit embarrassed when something's going on with my kid because I'm supposed to like have it together and I don't. And so my first and my second have been very, very easy. They've been like super easy. They do well in school. And my number 3, he's an 8th grader right now. And I don't know. I think he hates me. He's always mad. He just plays video games. I'm like the most annoying person to him. I've tried every strategy and I just don't know what's going on. And so this week I reached out to the middle school and I was like asking their social worker, like, what do I do? Like, I don't even know how to go about this anymore. Is this normal? And she kind of laughs at me and she's like, yeah, that is normal. And it's funny to hear you calling me about your own kid and not just, the kids that we've worked with together. So alongside you, I'm trying to figure out, like, is this normal? And at what point do I reach out and ask for help? At what point am I more annoying to him than helpful? I feel like right now I'm more annoying than helpful. So just know that we're all in this together. And this is a really difficult learning experience for me. And I know for some of you as well. So just remembering that like normal is relative, right? The definition of normal is conforming to a standard, a usual, typical, or expected standard. But we have to remember that normal is different when I grew up versus when my kids are growing up. In 1990, I did not have a cell phone, when I was going into middle school. I didn't have to be isolated for 1.5 years. So I know COVID made a big difference on what is actually normal right now. And then remembering that like all our kids have different personalities, they're different people. And so we can't put them all into this like normal box. So normal really is relative. Besides like phones and stuff, if you just think about how things were different back when you were younger, maybe you were in the United States, maybe you weren't, but if you're just reflecting on what is different now, for me, I stayed out playing with my friends out on the street until the street lights came on. That was just a normal thing for me. In this day and age, my kids tend to stay in their rooms and play video games with their friends. Is that socialization not as healthy as the one that I have? I don't know that I can say that. It's just a different normal these days. It's just a different type of social interaction. So just remembering, like, there's not just one normal. Like, all these things are influenced by outside factors, such as, what decade we're in, there's a pandemic going on. Our kids are all different. Ginny, can you think of anything when you were younger that doesn't occur now, or something that maybe your kids are experiencing that you never had to to deal with?
Well, obviously, like all of the social media, and just, you know, Instagram, and especially with my daughter, like you're hearing so much more now about Instagram and how and not Facebook because they're not on that, but mostly Instagram and how damaging it is to teenage girls. And so that, at one point I was a teenage girl too. And so I didn't have that social media like self-image, I mean, I had my 17 magazine, but I don't think that that was the way that it is now.
Yeah, and that makes me think about like being in high school in my day. It's like, there was a girl in school who was really beautiful and popular, and you kind of were like, I remember feeling like very inferior next to this person. So when I think of it from the perspective of when you're scrolling through Instagram, there's hundreds, thousands of girls like that, right? And so you're feeling insecure. And so I just think of like my feelings in high school on like this extreme level for the kids today. It's just totally different in what we're exposed to. And so again, just keeping in mind, like normal is relative. I am going to talk a little bit about Erik Erikson. And Erik Erikson was an ego psychologist who developed this theory that basically says that everybody's personality develops in their life over certain stages. And every stage has a crisis that we have to master, if you will. And so in adolescence, identity versus role confusion. So what happens during adolescence is that there's this conflict of like, who am I? That's like the big question of the adolescent crisis. It's like, who am I? Where do I belong? What is my role in society? It's, what do I want to be? Who do I want to be? I want to be loved. I want to be accepted. I want people to accept who I am fully. Who do I feel like today? This is like evolving ideas of like who we are. And if we master this area in our lives, we come up with our identity, like who we are. And if we don't, we tend to be in this, what we call role confusion. So I say this because part of development is figuring out who we are. And from the perspective of a parent, like I want to let you all know like how this impacts us. Like what's kind of sad to know is like as kids go through like 12 through 18, we become way less important to them, right? If you think about when we're babies, we have to feed them, we're there all the time. And so we're so used to that role as parents is just being there constantly, like totally helping them through. And then we get to the teen years and we start to feel a little bit pushed away. And it's a normal part of development, but I don't know about you, but as a parent, for me, it's slightly heartbreaking, right? I have a freshman right now who joined the football team and we did everything together. We went to Target together. We got coffee every day. And he just got to high school a couple of months back. And I've noticed this like separation of our relationship. It's changing. He's interested in his friends. He stays in his bedroom playing video games and laughing and talking with everyone. And quite frankly, I feel really left out. And I'm trying to like think of it as this part of like his growth and development is that's like a natural stage of moving forward. But as a mom, I'm just like, I'm missing him and I'm wanting that. And so I really was like thinking of this last night and like, how can I support him and, maybe not be overbearing and not be like what it used to be, and understanding that as he's changing, our relationship changes as well. So I'm going to go through different categories, and there's what we call like typical teen behavior and then potentially concerning behavior. So as we go through each category, if you like have any questions about it, sleep has been a very hot topic this year since we came back. And one of the problems with sleep is that, teenagers, as they're growing and developing, they tend to sleep more. During COVID, we were all at home. And what happened is when we came out, our stamina levels were lower. So we're more tired when we go home. I know myself and my son, we've come home from work and school and taken naps that we never took before. And so trying to identify like what's typical teen behavior as far as sleep goes. General rule of thumb, we want kids to get 8 to 10 hours of sleep. That doesn't happen. And when I'm really, really concerned is when I find out the why they're not sleeping. You know, sometimes kids are up late doing homework, they don't have enough time to sleep, versus kiddos who are trying to sleep and can't sleep. A lot of their social interactions are happening late at night. That's a totally normal thing. You know, I've heard parents say like they have all day to talk to their friends and they should be doing their homework at night, right? Well, the reality is they have passing periods. They have a very brief lunch. They don't really have a lot of time to interact. So what I'll hear is kids who are staying up till 12 and 1 with their friends on the phone or online because that's the only time they really can. And so for me, typical teenage behavior would be going to bed late, getting less than 8 hours of sleep. You know, when it becomes potentially concerning, I would say is if they're sleeping all day, if they're missing school, if they can't sleep at all, and you see their lights on at like 4 a.m. and you know they're not getting an adequate night of sleep, like that's when I'm feeling a little bit more concerned. Anytime a kiddo needs more than 13 hours, it means that they have like sleep deprivation, sometimes depression, sometimes, just maybe they have an iron deficiency. Like for me, concerning behavior is way too much sleep, like over 12, 13 hours, or not enough sleep. And there's this kind of culture of like, there's almost a pride in saying that I only slept 3 hours last night. It's almost like a competition. If you can, survive your day on 3 hours of sleep, it's almost like this badge of honor of like, so modeling for our kids, like how important sleep is. I know for myself, I haven't been a good model of sleep. Ginny, I think you're a good sleeper. You have a good schedule.
I force myself into it. Because I get up very, very early. And so I force myself to go to bed, and I actually I'm like, God, I don't talk to my family anymore because I'm like going to bed way earlier than they are. But I need to be able to do that to function. I take melatonin and I force myself to I have forced a bedtime routine on myself.
Yep.
I did want to make a comment about this area because this was a sign that I missed as a parent. I missed my daughter's depression and the sign because I was like, oh, teenagers sleep a lot. And I've always been a good sleeper. When I was a teenager, I slept a lot. And so I just wrote that off as normal teenage behavior without really paying attention closely enough to how much is she sleeping. And then I didn't realize because, I would leave for work, my husband and I would leave for work, and I was trusting her to get to school on time, and then she apparently had a very generous first period teacher that never marked her tardy or sometimes wouldn't mark her absent. And so her attendant, I don't know how she rolled over the high school and because she had poor attendance that I was not getting notice of.
Right.
And so this was definitely a sign that I missed. So I think this is something that with sleep, you want to make sure your kid's getting enough sleep because again, if they're only getting 4 hours of sleep a night, that it's not enough for a teenager. They need way more than that. But when they're getting too much and they seem to be sleeping all the time, that is something to pay attention to.
Definitely. I think we had a similar experience last year I had a senior, you had a senior, both of them went through a depression last year, and kind of the same thing for me. It was just my kid was getting up at 2:00 in the afternoon. And my assumption was that he went to bed at 4 a.m. and sometimes he did, but it wasn't until, we started to lift the quarantine and things like that, that he told me I was really in a bad spot. And as a mom, as a social worker, I'm looking back in hindsight, I'm oh my gosh, how did I miss that? And like you said, sleep was a huge flag that I just totally disregarded, and so definitely sleep. And if ever something comes up where you're just feeling maybe a little uncomfortable with your kiddo's level of sleep, talk to their doctor, reach out to me, let me know, consult with somebody. If you have an instinct as a parent, you're probably onto something.
Yeah, so Christina has a question in the chat before we move on. Weekdays, my kids go to bed around midnight, but on the weekends sleep until 2 to 3 p.m. Is that normal? I would actually say that probably because they're going to bed at midnight, and then I'm assuming they're getting up to 6:37 to get to school, depending on what time they start school. So that's not enough sleep during the week. Doctors will always tell you shouldn't try to catch up on the weekends. but I don't know of a single human in our society that doesn't catch up on the weekends. I certainly do. So I think that as long as you see them like, yeah, they might be a little sleep deprived during the week, but then they're catching up on the weekends. That's probably pretty normal.
Yeah, there's mixed research on like catching up on sleep and like sleep debt, if it's actually like a thing. But I would say generally speaking, weekends are a catch-up time. And, just monitoring them if they're able to function during the week, if they're, doing their thing during the week, and then that happens, I would say it's a little more normal than just like sleeping all the time every day, no matter what their obligations are. Okay. This is a fun topic. Moodiness and irritability. It is normal for them to be moody, frustrated, irritable. Adolescence is this transition time where they're working through new emotions, their hormones are going crazy, their thoughts are changing, their feelings are different. And it's very personal to me because I'm like, my kid was so nice and all of a sudden they hate me. But I think a lot of times it's just like they lack the ability to really convey what they're feeling. And it's also a time where mom and dad or guardian are just like the most annoying people on earth. Like, no matter what way you slice it, no matter how you say it, no matter how you come to your kid, you're just annoying. And I know that's harsh, but it's true. And I've been experiencing this a lot myself of like, it is normal to be irritable towards your parents because you're trying to push them away and you're trying to develop this like autonomy and independence. And so your parents hovering over you tends to be very annoying. So I would say the differentiation between like typical teen behavior and potentially concerning is like, it's one thing to be annoyed and irritable, and maybe a little moody and needing some space. But if it's really escalating and you're noticing that your kiddo is like flying off the handle for everything you say to a point of like, I've had some parents call this year of like, my kid has never expressed himself in a violent way. And today I went in his room and he just threw something at the wall and it crashed, and that's totally not like him. Something like that is a little more concerning. I also want to know, like, is it directed to one person? Is it directed to the whole family? Versus like, is it directed towards his teachers and their peers? And, because I think it's almost a little more acceptable when you are reacting in that way into people that you know and love. They always say like your loved ones are the easy targets, right? But when you're seeing this type of behavior at school with friends, for me, that's like potentially concerning. So just differentiating between like, I'll reflect on it too. Like, am I being annoying? Yes, I have told my kid to fold his clothes 15 times. I can see why he's irritated versus like, hey, how was your day? And then he like blows up at me, right? So it's like just kind of keeping an eye on what the triggers are, if there are even triggers, or if you're just seeing this kind of come out of nowhere. So that I would say like flying off the handle, being violent, those kind of things are not normal. And then just keeping an eye on like how it escalates, and again, what those triggers are. Maybe there's not triggers, and for me, that's a red flag.
I would say for me, I think this is something, as the teenager gets older, this area gets better. They definitely, as they get older, are less moody and irritable. But your age of your son, and like my son too, my son is 12, and like this, I'm super noticing this about him, like how irritable he will get. And he's like, leave me alone. Can you just leave me alone now? And I'll be like, yeah, leave me alone.
I know, like one of the questions, and this is more of like a question than a statement really, but for me, my youngest, the one that's in 8th grade, he's been more like not just irritable, but also like name calling. Like he's saying things to me that none of my other kids have ever said to me, like calling me a jerk or calling me, these names that I've never heard before. And I'm trying to be like this patient mom to like listen and hear him out. And so yesterday he said something to the effect of like, you don't love me. And I said, do you really feel like that? And he said, yeah, I really feel like that, like just totally out of nowhere. And so, the social worker in me is like trying to explore this. And then he just says, I just need you to be quiet and stop social workering me. And I'm like, like, I didn't even know how to like move on from there. And so as I'm writing all this last night, I'm like, Was that normal? Should I be worried? And I'm still kind of in the middle. I did reach out to his social worker, but I'm kind of like thinking back at being 12, I was very like 12 and angry. I remember being really awful to my parents. And if I can really like reflect on it, I was just feeling awkward. It was just a really awkward age for me. And I think it was like just anger about being uncomfortable in my own skin. And like looking back at it, I feel terrible, obviously, for my parents. So I'm trying to think of it from the perspective of like, I know that's also a part of normal development of just maybe not being comfortable in your skin and feeling angry about who you are and not knowing who you are. And I guess that goes back to the Erickson theory of just trying to figure that all out. But I would definitely say, like my son's behavior right now, I'm on the fence between normal and not normal, but mostly because my other two didn't respond that way. But I have seen kids respond that way. And how do you differentiate between like where to allow them to grow versus just like, where's the line about like respect, right? Like, is this a disciplinary thing? Do I just let him do his thing? And that's kind of been the question for me of like all these behaviors, we're human, right? We're going to react to them. We're going to be annoyed by it. We're going to be frustrated by it, and we're going to react accordingly. And so just knowing that that's normal too, like it's frustrating. Like, even though we know they're going through this development, it's still frustrating and annoying and often disrespectful. So just like, you know, just try to keep an open mind. I know it's not easy when you feel like you've done everything for your kiddo and they're responding to you in this way of like, you know, I don't appreciate you and I'm upset with you for no reason. And so normal, not normal, depending on, you know, the extent of that behavior. I know this is a hot topic here and everywhere, right? Like one of the first conversations I have with my own kids is like, how are you doing in school? It is normal for your kids to be stressed about their grades. It's normal for them to be worried about exams. It's also normal for them to not really think it's the most important thing in the world. And so when you're talking about like kids trying to find out who they are, school to them sometimes just feels like an added obstacle of like them experiencing life, right? And so I would say, you know, concerning behavior regarding grades, things like perfectionism and anxiety, for me, really red flags. Like, is your kiddo, how does your kiddo respond when they fail? Are they just like not okay and inconsolable? Are they, you know, having a hard time sleeping and eating because school is on their mind and they're just feeling super stressed about it? It's good to be stressed, like to have that healthy amount of stress. But one of the biggest concerns that I see here is excessive stress about school. I always tell students that there's so many parts that make them up, right? Their school, their friendships, their family, their environment, their religion, their recreation, all these things, but we tend to hyper focus on grades. And so what I'm always looking for is students who have a little bit of balance. I want them to have fun and I want them to do well in school. And so what happens is a lot of times I have kids who are not having fun and doing well in school, not having a social life, but doing well in school. So when it comes to grades, I think as long as there's balance, right? Because I think sometimes we see an A and we're like, oh, they're doing great. But I also have a lot of clients who have straight A's, right? And they're just excessively stressed. So just being mindful that there's more to our kids than just academics. And I know we know this intuitively, but sometimes our behavior doesn't really reflect that, right? I don't really ask my kid how they're doing in other areas of their life as much as I do about their grades. So just knowing that it's normal to it's normal to care. It's normal to lack the motivation to care, but really it's like, how balanced is your kiddo? That's what I'm looking for. Like if that's the only thing they can think about or do, then I'm a little bit concerned. Last year during lockdown, this was the buzzword of the year, if you will, motivation. My kid's not motivated. My kid shut down. My kid doesn't do their homework anymore. They don't care anymore. Is my kid being lazy versus are they depressed? It's so easy to assume that they're sleeping because they're lazy. I've had conversations with families where I'm saying like, I did a whole screening. your kiddo is depressed, and still the sentiment is that, no, I think my kid's just lazy. I think they can do more. And the truth is they probably can do more when they're feeling well. But how do we differentiate lazy versus unmotivated? And one of the things that I'm always looking for is a big change, like a dramatic change in their behavior. If you have a student who's always turned in their assignments on time, hasn't struggled in school, and all of a sudden they're doing nothing, to me, that's concerning. I look back and I think, Jenny, we've talked about this with like our younger kids, like they don't care at all about school, right? And I try to think back again about like when I was their age, school was not my priority, right? I wanted to hang out with my friends and I wanted to do fun things and I wanted to like do my preferred activities. So I wasn't motivated to do school, but I would do it because I knew that I had to. And I think sometimes we put a lot of pressure on our kids to care more than is normal in that developmental stage, if you will. Like when you're learning who you are, your social life is very important. And as a parent, I'm like, you can't hang out with your friends until you're done with school. And I totally understand that framework, but really this is their priority in life. And so when I think of motivation, I'm looking for big changes. Some kids just aren't into school just yet, or maybe it's not the most important thing on their plate. But if they start to lack motivation for things like basic daily living, showers, getting up, eating, for me, very concerning. If they're losing their steam for math because they think their class is boring, is a little more normal than my kid doesn't even have the motivation to brush their hair, get dressed, get out of bed, take a shower. So I would say that if they're getting unmotivated to the point that they can't perform their basic living tasks, or they've shut down in a very dramatic way, they change their behavior towards school, then I would say that's definitely something to be concerned about. Withdrawal and isolation. I don't know how many of you have teenagers that spend the majority of their time in their bedroom. I do. Come straight home from school, do their homework in their room. It's even gotten to the point lately where they take their dinner into their room. And my husband, we had this conversation the other day. My husband's like, I think he's depressed. He's always in his room. And so I'm like thinking about it. Well, I'm listening to him in his room. He's playing some sort of video game. I can hear two of his peers through the like game. They are cracking up. They're having a great time. They're just like connecting, they're playing, they're fighting off the same guy or whatever. And he sounds like he's having a blast. And so in my mind, I'm like, is he withdrawn and isolated, or is he engaging in a normal social behavior? And my husband and I kind of were like debating because, you know, again, back in 1990, we went outside and we played with our friends and we did these things, and life is just a little bit different now. I would say typical teen behavior is spending time in their room. Are they really alone? A lot of times not. They're talking to somebody, they're connecting, you know, giving one-word answers. I ask my kids how their day was. They say fine. Or I ask them how things are going. Good. And I think that's just their cue to like get rid of me. I think that's pretty normal.
I would say with this, like, even if you aren't hearing your kids' voices, like other kids' voices, like you are, like you want, I think that's an advantage. But I just remember when I was a teenager and my mom would get so mad at me because I would be locked in my room and on the phone with my friends. Three-way calling when I was a teenager, it was like a thing. And like my friend had like three-way calling on her phone line. We didn't have it on ours, but she had it on hers. She was richer than us. And so she would like call our other friend, and like, it was like a whole thing. But for hours. And so I think now a teenager's like on social media and texting their friends and that sort of thing, like that's the equivalent. Like they are doing that for hours, and it's pretty normal.
Yeah. And when you're a teenager with all that stuff going on, it's like your family is boring. Like
Yeah.
That's the mindset, right? It's like, I get it. I'm less exciting than your peers. I'm less exciting than the girl you might be crushing on. I'm less exciting than your video game.
And admittedly, to a teenager, my life, yeah, I'm pretty boring. Not gonna lie.
Totally.
No, I don't do many exciting things.
Even when your kid like engages with everybody but you. That sucks, but it is kind of normal. It's like you have spent so much time with this kiddo, and as they're starting to spread their wings, it's like you're like the first one to get pushed away. And again, it sucks, but it is part of normal development. And it's normal for them to want to be independent. You know, I know there's this like dialogue in most houses of like, did you do your homework? Like, I know, I'm going to do it. And it's like their words versus their behavior don't really line up, right? You're not really doing it. But one of the things that I've learned over the last couple of years is like, no matter how much I say it, it literally goes one ear in, out the other, right? They don't care what I have to say. And so I think, again, that's part of just trying to be independent. And when you're learning to be independent, you kind of suck at it. And I think sometimes like, you know, like our book last year, like the gift of failure, sometimes we just have to watch them fail because micromanaging them is actually not contributing to anything positively. It's making my blood pressures go up. It's making my hair turn gray. It's not actually changing the behavior of my kiddo. And I think that's pretty typical. It's like they want to be independent. I'm still trying to hover and micromanage, and you know, it's not helpful. But I would say in this category for concerning behavior, it's like if they're withdrawing from their preferred activities, if they play soccer and they decide they don't want to play anymore, or they're bored with it, or they don't want to talk to their friends, they're in their room alone. They were very social, and now you're noticing that they've really scaled back and spend a lot of time alone. That change in behavior for me is definitely concerning. Defiance. This word is so like, there's such a lot, like huge space between like being defiant and then trying to like figure out who you are and be independent, right? And so I think we all have different variations of definitions of what defiance is. Some defiance is normal and healthy. You know, they want to push back on boundaries. Sometimes they want to test the waters and challenge their teachers and get into trouble. And I think that is really common. But I would say like a bigger indication of an issue is like when it comes to like extreme stuff like law breaking, if they're always in trouble at school, suspensions, you know, not following the rules that you have at home that go against like safety precautions, things like that. Like, you know, I think if you tell your kid, you know, you need to be home at 9 and they're rolling in at midnight, like to me, that's concerning, like what's going on. But I would say just kind of pushing back a little bit, or even saying no, or one of the things you'll hear is like a lot of questioning, like why? Like, is that defiance, or is that just like, I don't know, like in like pushing, just kind of pushing back against what we do, because our kids are not always gonna like just say yes to what we ask, right?
I think this also goes hand in hand with what we talked about a couple of minutes ago with being irritable and moody, especially with parents when they're pushing back. And Yvonne, you were talking about your son, like, you know, with like all of a sudden the name calling and that sort of thing. I think that is like testing the boundaries of parent rules and like how far can I push before they set down the limits, and like that. And a lot of this is like really seeing how far can they push you to see when you're like, no, that's it.
I think the name calling yesterday was my line. I was like, okay, I tried to be understanding, but now we got a problem, right? Like, but I let him push me pretty far. That's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up, because it's true. It's like, oh, normally I didn't think I could get away with that, but here I am. And then yesterday was like, oh, it's time for tutoring. And he says, I'm not doing that today. And I was like, that for him is like really pushing, because you know, I think he's been very compliant. And so between the defiance and, you know, just the irritability, I'm like, again, on the fence, is this normal? Is this just him? I'm not, you know, I'm not used to it, but definitely pushing the envelope. But again, like extreme behaviors where they're getting in trouble with the law, where they're doing things that are unsafe for them. Yeah, and just that quick change in behavior. Like one day they're just like complying and doing what they're supposed to do, and then the next day they're just like switched and like shutting down with what you have to say. I'm definitely concerned. Then at that point, I want to know, like, you know, who are you hanging out with? Are you using substances? Like just noting, you know, your kid. I always tell parents this, you're the expert in your kid. I'm the expert in mental health. You're the expert in your kid. You know them. Go with your gut always. This is a sore subject. Maybe I'll let you talk about this one, Jenny.
So this is something that some parents, and I think it just depends. I think this is an area that as a parent, it really depends on what you did yourself as a teenager. And did you yourself experiment with alcohol and drugs and come out of that okay? And you're like, no, that's normal. Or, did you like totally not? I can look at my husband and I who had very different high school experiences. I admittedly, I experimented. My husband absolutely did not. And we just had really different views about this as parents. Whereas I tend to be like, yeah, it's not that big of a deal. But then again, this is an area where I missed a lot of signs. Like my daughter, like later told me, she's like, oh yeah, mom, I was smoking pot in my room all the time. And I was like, what? Like had no idea. And so having like, what I really like, I like this quote on here. This is why it's important to talk openly with your teenager about peer pressure as well as the dangers of drugs and alcohol. And I think that this is an area that as a parent, you have to be really careful to go into this conversation without judgment, because if your teenager suspects that you find out that they've been experimenting with alcohol and drugs and you're going to like blow your mind and like, just completely ground them and like, lock them in the house and like, they're going to be punished for the rest of their life. They're never going to tell you about it because they're going to fear that punishment. No, and so I think that, it can be really difficult because it's one of those areas that it can be normal. Like it said, that most teenagers are going to come across this unless they are extremely sheltered. Then they're going to come across this. And, but it is also one of those areas that can be super concerning and can like really spiral out of control really fast.
And I like what you said about like how we grew up, right? Like I grew up very like, I never smoked, I never drank, I didn't do any of those things when I was growing up. And so it's almost like I was blind to the fact that my kid would do that. I had, my oldest was like he never got in trouble, like pretty innocent, like barely dated, didn't really, if he ever saw somebody having a drink, he was like, oh, I would never do that. So it just wasn't really on my radar until this year when I sent him off to college and I got a phone call from him that he wasn't feeling good. And so I was worried about COVID. So I said, oh no, you can't come home because I'm afraid you're sick. You got to get tested. And then he confessed to me that he had drank a lot for the first time the night before and got sick all over his dorm. So I was like, kind of like you with the smoking in your room, like, what? And so in that moment, I was so grateful that he told me, even though I was like on the inside, like super shocked. And it gave me the opportunity to talk to him about things that I should have talked to him about before. It's like I almost was like in denial that was a possibility with my kid. And I think that goes with like, again, like how innocent he was. And so now I know like going into college, going into like your later teen years, like it is so normal for kids to want to experiment. And what was kind of cool in the end is that he has like 8 roommates. It's like a big suite with a bunch of kids in it. They're all, 18 years old and just like experimenting and learning. And when I went there to help them clean up the mess they had all made, I had this perfect opportunity to talk about binge drinking and safety. And so that day when I talked to them, they made this pact with each other of like, if we drink, we don't let strangers in the house because we don't know them and something bad can happen. If we drink, we can't leave the house because we can get run over or something bad can happen. So it was like this cool opportunity to set the ground rules. And I told them like, I don't agree with you drinking before you're 21, but in the event that you do, these are the things that I think should happen. And that's what we call like harm reduction, right? That's like, and so now I'm a little more open-minded to the fact that like, this is something that kids are going to do. Kids smoke pot, kids drink alcohol. And as a parent, it's frightening because I know all the bad things that can happen, but I also know that yeah, our kids are going to try things. That's just what it is. And having open dialogue, and like you said, not acting shocked and surprised when it happens, and just being there to listen and support, because if we freak out about it, they're going to shut down and never share with us. So that's like one thing I felt like I did right, is like he felt safe enough to come and tell me that. And on the inside I was freaking out, but on the outside I was trying to just be open-minded to that. So, you know, experimenting is normal. What's not normal would be like binge drinking, doing drugs that are like potentially fatal, you know. How often are they partying? Is he, you know, not attending to his classes because he's drinking too much? Is it impacting his relationships? Like, what's happening? What's typical versus what's concerning?
I would also say when and where. Like, you know, on a weekend and they're like hanging out with their friends, more normal. If they're doing it at school, that's worrisome. Like that's a cause of concern.
Absolutely. Yeah, again, not my favorite topic based on my current experience. Lying and withholding information. I have students sometimes, and myself included, where like they'll tell their parents something small and their parent like flies off the handle, right? And then something major will happen and I have to tell the parents, and the parents are just blown away that their kid wouldn't tell them that. And I'm like, based on your reaction last time, it makes sense that your kid doesn't want to share that with you, right? And again, that goes back to like how we should respond when our kids tell us something, because we want them to continue telling us things. It's not uncommon for teens to be secretive. There were things growing up where I do not feel comfortable talking about them with my parents.
There's still stuff that I won't tell my parents. I don't need to know that.
It is so normal. Like, I don't want my parents to know certain, like you said, still. And so it is normal for our kids to withhold things from us that are, you know, they could be embarrassing, or they're afraid they're going to be judged. When we get into concerning behavior, it says here like pathological lying or hiding really risky things. I believe that I know my kids pretty well. But again, I could be totally naive and not know anything. I don't know how much they're withholding. And I do think part of that is normal, but I try to like be open-minded to what they say and hope that they keep talking. But I also know that there's things that no matter how comfortable I make them, I'm not the person they want to talk to about it. And I think that's normal.
Right. I would also, I think this is where, like, when you have communication with your kids and coming at it from trying to be as unjudgmental, I don't know, I might have just made up a word, but you know what I'm saying, like coming in without any sort of judgment, as much as you can. And this is really hard because we talked about before that as a parent, you need to set limits. And so you set limits of like what's acceptable and what's not, but you also have to make it clear, if you break those limits, I'm still going to love you. It's, you know, we're still going to be okay. And you know, that's just normal, you know, because I think kids are like more likely to lie to their parents when they're afraid of their reaction, because they don't want you to, teenagers, you know, as much as they're going to shove their parents away and be like, I don't want to talk to you, they still love you. Like, disappointing their parents is like absolutely the worst thing that a teenager, like, they do not want to disappoint us. And so that's why they lie. So when you catch your kid in a lie, I had to, like, this, and I'm personal experience, because when you catch your kid in a lie, it's like really heartbreaking. Like, why wouldn't you just tell me? Like, I thought we had a really good relationship. Why wouldn't you tell me about this? Why would you lie about this? It's because my daughter didn't want to disappoint me. And like, that's the reason.
Yep. I would say more often than not, I have kids who, like, you know, if I'm doing counseling with them, I can see them 2 times. And then after that, I need parent consent. And so I'll ask them, like, why are you worried to tell your parents? Like, what do you think the reaction is going to be? And more often than not, they say, I'm not worried about their reaction. I'm worried that they're going to be worried. So it's like me not telling them is a way to protect them from this information that might be hurtful to them. So it's like kids are very aware of like how their behavior and their circumstances make us feel as parents, and they really care. And what I'll tell them is, do you think your mom's dumb? You think she doesn't already know something's going on? Like, this is actually going to be helpful for her because now she's not just guessing. She knows what's happening, right? And so sometimes withholding information, like you said, is like protecting our parents. It's like, I don't need them to worry about. They have enough on their plate.
I do want to jump in because there's a lot of comments in the chat about and questions about vaping at school and in the restroom. Vaping is our topic for next week, so I'm not going to get into that today, but that we are spending all of next week talking about that. So don't worry.
We got it. Sex and dating. Growing up, again, I went to a really small private school and it was very religiously affiliated, and sex was just like, no, there was like a non-negotiation. Abstinence was like what was taught. And even being a social worker now and like having teenagers, obviously my views on a lot of things have shifted, but it's still kind of like surprises me, right? But one of the things I say is, like, when it comes to dating, I think a lot of times we invalidate or minimize our kids' feelings. And one of the things I'll tell students is, like, I met my husband in 10th grade. We've been together 25 years. So I know that in high school, your feelings are valid. A lot of times we'll say, like, you don't even know what love is yet. You're only 16. And for a teenager, that's like the best way to get them to shut down, is to invalidate that their feelings are real. And maybe they don't know what it is yet, but just knowing that, like, in this phase of their life, this is such an important piece, because part of this identity versus role confusion is the need to be loved and accepted. And so this is the time where they're trying to figure that out. They're testing the waters with, people that they're attracted to. They're finding out who they like, who they're attracted to, all these things. And so sex and dating, it's like, sometimes I'll have people say, like, my kid's not allowed to date until they get out of high school. And that very well might be your stance on it, but chances are they're already dating. Not all of them, but a lot of time that's what they do. And then it goes back to, like, withholding information. My parents said I can't date, but I'm doing it anyways. Acknowledging that dating is just like, in being attracted to other people, it's just a normal part of growing up. And it's like, we worry as parents that this becomes the priority over education. And in their minds, it is, right? And so what is normal in, like, sexual behavior versus what do we want for our kids, right? In my perfect world, my kids would be, like, probably absent until they got married and have one partner, like, because I know the pain and suffering that can come from heartbreak and all these things, right? So in my role of wanting to protect them, that's what I want. But the reality is, I know that my kids are going to have, partners and have sex and do all these things that, make me worry for them. So sexual behaviors are a normal part of growing up. I would say, like, if it is, between people of similar ages, if it's not something that, is like what I need to report, like, age limits and things like that, it's normal to look at pornography. I've actually had quite a bit of referrals from parents of, like, oh my gosh, I saw my son watching pornography. How do I make him stop? And knowing that that is actually a normal part of development. And how do you communicate that with your kid, that that's a normal part of development, right? It's something that, it's one of those topics I wouldn't want to talk about with a parent, right? Like, I'm sure nobody wants to have that conversation, but knowing that, like, experimenting with sex, thinking about sex is a normal part of where they are. When I'm concerned is when kids are involved in abusive relationships. I meet with several teenagers who are in emotionally abusive relationships and don't even realize it. We have a group on campus, it's called the T Club, and their main role is talking about, like, safe dating, self-esteem, violence in dating, what does a healthy relationship look like? And this is so important because students, you don't inherently know you don't really know what healthy dating looks like. I mean, we model it as parents of how we date. They learn a lot on TV and social media, but I think it's they don't always know what to do, right? Like I'll have students who are like, yeah, my boyfriend looks at my phone and he has all my passwords and he hates when I talk to other guys and he flies off the handle when, I talk to another guy, and they're not realizing there's like this power and control situation going on with their partner. And to them, it looks like love, right? Oh, he's jealous when I talk to someone else. That must mean he loves me. But really, it's like a really unsafe situation. So I would say the concerning behavior would be like toxic relationships, sexual behavior that's not, there's no consent, transmitting sexual images on your phone, the internet. I've had students who talk to older people online that are like way older than them, sending pictures, things like that. Like that for me is concerning behavior. And I think it's such a hard topic to talk about with our kids, but I think it's so important because then we can help them identify when things are not healthy. Like rather than saying you're not allowed to date, like if you do choose to date, this is what you need to be looking for. This is what, is healthy. This is what's not healthy. And having that ability to communicate, I think is so important. Go ahead, Jenny.
So because there was a comment in the chat about, I don't want my child to date into college. And I think all of us, like, we would rather them not do this in high school. But it is normal. It is developmentally normal for them to start being interested in this as they're a teenager and when they're in high school. That is completely normal behavior. And so, and I always in my role, I always try to be very careful to not tell parents how they should parent because everybody has their own rules, and I respect that. I guess my caution would be, because this is normal behavior, your child is likely to participate in this, and if you have these rules that know you're not allowed to date in high school, then they're probably going to do it behind your back. Mm-hmm. And that is when like all of these worrisome things that maybe you might see and like pick up on, if they are hiding everything from you because they don't want to tell you that they're dating, then you're not able to help them with this. Yeah. And so that would just be my caution about thinking about rules about dating. Yeah. And that it potentially is setting up a situation where they're going to hide it from you, and then you're not there to help them with it.
I think anything we take a really hard stance on with our kids is we can guarantee they're not going to talk to us about it. If I'm like, we're never to smoke pot and never have sex with anyone, I'm the last person they're going to talk to. And a lot of times, if you get caught up in a situation with drugs or sex or there's some sort of problem, we really want them to have the ability to get support in that. And so, those are our feelings. We don't want this to happen. And we can share our concerns as to why we think it could be harmful at this point in their life. But at the end of the day, they are going to make that decision all the time. Please don't tell my mom that I have a boyfriend, please don't, my mom will be so mad. And it's like, my preference is that you already know, and you have the ability to be there to support them when something goes wrong. This is where we catch our kids when they fall at this age. And so sometimes we just have to put aside our own feelings. I know where we're going with it. Like, we don't want you to date because you're going to fall back on your studies and you're going to get hurt and all these things. But the reality is, this is something that they're going to do. I know we're almost in on time, but this is just a quick list of like, these are things in general to look out for your kid, giving up, the sleep stuff, avoiding school, big changes in appetite. Again, it's like any huge changes in behavior, your kid better than anyone else. Go with your gut, call me, consult with me, send me an email, reach out to your doctor. Outbursts, withdrawing from activities they used to love or used to enjoy, or people they really used to like. Excessive hostility. That for me is like a really, really big one with teenagers. These are all the things that I think are just not helpful. And I'm guilty of probably 80% of them. Trying to get rid of, snowplow parenting, getting rid of all of their problems. They're going to have struggles and we want to be there by their side. We don't want to be in front of them, pushing them all out of the way. We want to be there to support them when they fall. Don't assume that their mental health or the struggles are a way to manipulate. Sometimes they are, but most time there's some validity to what people are saying. Getting angry is not helpful. Telling the rest of the family about stuff that's going on with your kid is not helpful. One-upping them, minimizing their feelings. Oh, you think you had it bad? I had it terrible way back in 1995 when, we didn't have phones or whatever, just like invalidating their struggle. telling them to calm down. It's all in your head. Don't feel sorry for yourself. You're going to be fine. Those are all what we call like toxic positivity. It's like we're forcing them to feel good about stuff that they shouldn't have to feel good about. There always will be somebody that has it worse off than them. Telling them that is not helpful. Telling someone to stop thinking about it, shake it off, forget about it, not helpful. My favorite one, what could you possibly have to worry about? You have one job, which is to go to school. And again, that invalidates all the other things that are going on in their lives. I guess we can stop there. Here's how we can help. Modeling our behavior is like the biggest indicator of how they're going to do things. They are watching what we do. Model our self-care, encourage them. We have a tendency to take things away from them, but maybe praising them and giving them things when they're doing, things well. Try to take their perspective. Our life is way different than theirs is, and their life is way different than ours was. And so knowing that they have different struggles than we do, don't take it personally. That's a hard one. Monitor their sleep, listen, don't demand perfection, praise their effort, be open to support from the outside if something is going wrong. It's okay to not be the person that is there by their side to support them. Sometimes they don't want that, but being open for a professional or someone else to step in, I think is super appropriate. So that is what I got for today.
Yeah, I think that would hopefully just help. I know we didn't have a lot of time for questions. So a couple of things that came up, there was a couple of questions in the chat, like about like how to help your kid talk to a teacher where they're reluctant to talk to a teacher and ask questions, which I totally, a lot of times they have kids struggle, especially if they're shy and introverted, they don't want to speak up in class. I would recommend encouraging them to send an email, and you could even help them send that email. Like they should send the email, it should come from their email, but you could sit with them and like help them phrase it. And so give them that support. I think that is a strategy that really works very well. And then hopefully then they send the email and then the teacher takes the initiative and approaches the kid and talks to them. So I just wanted to interject that and address those, a couple of questions that were in there. But again, a lot of the questions about vaping, we're going to talk about that next week. So next week, we're going to have a guest speaker, somebody that is an expert in this. They always come in and show us pictures of all of the latest devices and things like that. And so that you as a parent know what to look for, and like, because a lot of the vaping implements are really deceptive and you would not know that that is what they use to vape. And so we like to show parents some pictures and everything so that you know what to look out for. But that's next week. So have a wonderful rest of your week. Stay dry. It's pouring. Well, when I came in here, it was pouring. So I don't know what's happened in the past hour, but everybody have a nice day. Okay.
All right. This is a very good subject and informative, and we love it. Thank you.
Oh, good.